Are you ready?
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, good afternoon, everyone. Now, I welcome you again to the second session of day two. So, this talk is on RF imperfections and SNR for front ends. It is to be delivered by Dr. Arun Ashok. So, now I request Dr. Manish Hooda to kindly introduce the speaker to the audience.
Thank you, Professor Arun, for giving me opportunity to, share the bio of one of my oldest friend and I would say colleague in the past at SCL, Dr. Arun Ashok. Dr. Arun Ashok is from Jülich, Germany. He is working as a senior research with the Central Institute of Engineering and Analytics, JEDEC, Jülich Research Center, Germany. His expertise is in RF and analog mixed signal design, where he has more than 9 years of experience. He started his career with ISRO as a scientist at Semiconductor Laboratory, Chandigarh, before leaving for his higher studies. Between 2012 and 2016, he worked as a research associate with Roth University, where he completed his PhD in RF microelectronics. He worked during most of part of his career in the cellular RF front-end design. His area of interest are phase lock loop, PLL, RFICs, circuits, and system design for advanced technology. Dr. Arun Ashok have co-founded a startup for analog RF at Cochin called Silesium Circuit Limited. Silesium is a German version of Silicon, Silicon Circuit Private Limited. With this, may I request Dr. Arun Ashok to enlighten us with the knowledge in the field of RF imperfection and SNR for front-end design. Over to you, Dr.
Yeah.
Ashok. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Arun. Thank you, Dr. Manish, sir. So it's actually a great pleasure to join NanoDave as a consecutive second time. And so this time also I will be not currently focusing on the devices, but something towards the application side. And thanks again for the great introduction. Right, it is always nice to be back. It feels good to be back. Okay, so without wasting time, I'll jump into it. So the introduction has already been done. So first, I will go through my employer profile, just give you a brief idea. So what we are doing, as well as the institute where I belong to, the like ZA2. And after that, I will be getting into the main topic of this presentation, which would be how the imperfections affect the SNRs and what are the imperfections in the RF front ends. Huh? So what are the imperfections that we have to take care? So, say for example, what are the noise issues in the RF receivers and how we can quantify the noise issues, and what are the another important source for the noise are the phase noise from the oscillators and how the phase noise is impacting the performance, and what should be the specification of the phase noise so that to keep, for example, the SNR intact. No, that's really important. And while the noise and the phase noise and everything that impact the SNR on the lower level, like directly impact the noise flow, and it is the linearity which actually impacts the signal on the higher end. So what are the impacts of non-linearity, how we can quantify them will be explained. And at the same time, I'll also show you like an addition point, like what is the self leakage impact, which means if you have a RF front end which is working where the receiver and the transmitters are working simultaneously, what is the impact, how we can, or how we can tolerate it, how we can calculate it. And and the whole thing with a summary. And important thing of this thing is that all these topics that we are going to design or which we are going to discuss, they are really very essential for the radio front end design. And it's easy to figure out these problems as early as in the design stage using simple mathematical equations. You can simply open an Excel and do it. That's the beauty of the system design. So you can get a first hand idea of whether the RF design or the architecture in your mind is actually possible for the application before you. Okay, so let's start with the introduction of Jülich. Um, so Forschung Center Jülich or Research Center Jülich is actually located on west part of Germany, as you can as you can see here, and it's a part of Helmholtz Research Alliance. So among these 19 centers, Jülich is one of the biggest center where we employ more than 6,000 employees in total, including more than half being the scientist. So a considerable portion is also PhD students, trainees, and students. So we involve lot of students in semiconductors, applied sciences, it would be similar to like what say the federal government funded IISc Institute of Science is doing and so on. So visit our websites to figure out if any of this interest, any of the areas interests you, and you are always welcome to apply for any such PhDs, internship, master theses, bachelor thesis, and so on. I will be really glad to help. Yeah, so these are some of the history from of the Forschung Zentrum Jülich, or no, Research Center Jülich. So it was founded long back, like 1956, and majority of the funding is done actually by the federal government, and we also have a significant third-party funding here, which is actually not mentioned in this one. And there are many institutes, for example, in the Forschung Zentrum Jülich, and our institute is one of them. And we primarily is an engineering hand for the other institutes. So all the electronic activities which is happening in the research center is done by us. And in addition, we are also pioneering the use of semiconductors or use of IC design to solve majority of the day-to-day problems. For example, these are the areas where we are focusing now, primarily in the information field, mainly the quantum computing and neuromorphic computing. This is really significant because these two areas has been researched extensively everywhere in industry and the research areas, as I have seen also some of the topics in this nano day as well, focusing on some aspects of quantum computing and neuromorphic computing. Yeah. So here the aim is to have a scalable quantum computer. So we are actually making the, say, the devices which can enable to be a fundamental piece of this quantum computer. And in addition, we have the end-to-end system where we also have, say, for the error correction mechanisms, the control mechanisms, and everything. So ultimately, the output of such a results will be the activities will be the research or the inputs for building a scalable computer. So we have all the facilities for this quantum computing. We can actually measure the devices in minus 273 Kelvin or millikelvin stages, and characterize the components. And the main approach that we are following here is we are using the basic CMOS here, not really a fancy or any new say for example devices, primarily because we are aiming for a scalable approach and a cost effective approach. Only CMOS is satisfying this criteria till now, till this point. Another important thing is in neuromorphic computing, which is sort of like a brain inspired computing. So the fundamental aim is here to say avoid the bottleneck which is present in the typical von Neumann architecture, which is like the main bottleneck for towards processor is basically the communication between the processor and the memory, right? And in this neuromorphic computing, or the way our the brain inspired computing, the idea is you move the memory close to the processor so that you have the computing memory, and so that you can speed up the whole process. Not just speed up, you can, for example, if you compare to a research task or a programming task or some task between two processors, one being typical for Neumann and one being neuromorphic computing, the neuromorphic will actually take much less power compared to that. So it has got wide variety of applications for that. So these are the two active areas we are pursuing, in addition to the several other areas such as neuroimaging, climate, energy, renewable, bioeconomy, and neuron static. So in all these areas, we are working on system modeling, system architectures, integrated circuit architectures, hardware development, software development, say anything, right? So end-to-end system development we are doing, primarily aiming for the integrated as well as the discrete circuit implementation. Now, having said that, I'll go to the next slide, which would be, say, this is a typical development methodology, which is actually common across, say, for example, most of the semiconductor IC design process. So left side, we have the system design, and the right side, we have the integration. We start from the specification, implement those, then following with a system design, component design, then we have the complete implementation here. Then again, for each and every integration and verification, we have the feedback process so that our the quality is maintained at each and every stages. So this is just to show that there's an end-to-end development. And for you, what is interesting would be to take part in the research activities or to take part as a student in these research activities, for example. Now let's come to the core of this talk, which would be the RX imperfections and the signal to noise ratio for the front ends. So the main idea would be to inform you all, to introduce you all. So probably it is not really a new topic or anything. It is very common. It's very basic. So I will just go through some of the topics which are important when you think of designing, for example, an RF front end. So what is noise, what is linearity, how much the noise has to be, how much the linearity has to be, how you quantify those things, and what can you do to these parameters so that you can get the best out of a particular architecture, or how can you devise an architecture to improve these conditions. These are the main aim, which is aiming in this talk. And in this talk, I'm primarily aiming for a front end for a receiver side. So equivalently, there are certain other measures for the transmitter side also, but I think if you combine these two things, it will take more than time as we have right now. Okay, so let's jump into it. This one. So you can see here on the right side, a lot of a lot of x and y, lot of, it's like a bar chart, it's a graph. So on the on it's what it is, what I'm trying to show on here is what the a radio or a typical receiver sees when it is functioning. So the main point being that, so for example, this is the case of a UMTS or a 3G communication, where we have this desired signal which is shown in the green. 1 second. Okay, we have the desired signal which is shown in green, which is actually minus 96 dBm. And one thing important is that for those who are really new to first time listening to an RF design or something, we use decibels to represent most of the power lines, because to represent that wide dynamic range. So because if you are representing in terms of voltage, it will come from microvolts and volts. So that will be like a lot of range to represent, a lot of digit to represent. But in dB, you can represent the whole dynamic range, right? Now, back to the power scenario. So you have the desired signal here, which we like to receive and which we like to extract information, which we use for voice channel, or for example, say for example, any data channel as well when the power is high. So along with the desired channel, we have several other bands also, because it's radio, right? You have so many interferences coming in. You have self interferences coming in. For example, you are working in one band, your neighbor is working in another band. So there are a lot of frequencies coming in. It is like this. And such a picture you can actually see from any specifications, from say 3GPP or any standards. So here what it says that, okay, you have the central signal, which is the desired signal, and then you have an adjacent interference which is of the power minus 63 dBm, and then you have an interferer which is like 10 megahertz away, which is of the power minus 44. Then you have another one which is of minus 30. Then you have another one at 40 megahertz which is of minus 15, and so on. So there are like several bands, right? And here one important thing is that you have classified the interferences as several types. So one would be the adjacent band, and in band, and out of band. What are these things? So the in band would be those signals which is actually received by your receiver, which will be within their channel bandwidth, the RF channel bandwidth. Those are the in band bandwidth, right? And then there are some other bands which are out of band. This would be typically the case, for example, when you are speaking, when you're receiving something on on your phone, and then there is another base station trying to transmit to a phone. If you are working in the edge of the cell region, right? So there will be another base station working on the neighboring cell, and that power is going to be really high, and that would constitute this out of band interferences like this, which would be far away, 40 megahertz. But still it is really important, because now you will be receiving this as well. And what are the effect of these interferences? How can we receive this signal in the presence of these interferences? That is the key aspect that we are discussing in this talk. Okay, now this is about the higher power levels. And what about the lower power level? So the lower power levels is always limited by the noise flow. And what is a noise flow, right? So every electronic device, passive or active, it generates noise. Now, if you're starting from the antenna, you have this 50 ohm impedance, which we already assume. Then, if you look for the power for the noise calculations, you can figure it out that the noise produced by such an antenna is something called 4 kTr. There's an equation for that, depending on your Boltzmann's constant, temperature, and everything. And when you figure when assuming that your antenna is matched to the RF front end, which is typically the case, where you have like 50-50 ohm matching, your half of the power is dropped there, and what you remaining here would be a power which is called KT. And then if you consider a bandwidth, because if you're considering, for example, a 3GPP or a 3G system, you have assuming a bandwidth of 5 megahertz, you'll have this much noise power coming in. So everything beyond this power is considered as noise. So this receiver cannot identify that one, right? And we are trying to say, for example, decrease the noise. And whatever above the noise floor is coming, we will be receiving it, and it has to be at least some dB, like an SNR dB more than the noise floor, so that the receiver can conveniently then demodulate it. That is the whole process. Okay, now, as I said, the aim of the receiver here is to demodulate the desired signal, which is like this, with the required SNR. That is really important, because the SNR depends on your application. So if you move away from the base station, away from the tower, as you say, then your SNR you can only do a voice call. You can see in your phone that the signal is very low. You can do only a voice call. There, your signal to noise ratio is only like 7 dB. That is required for the voice. right? You cannot have any data. You would have figured it out. But as you come close to the base station, your power level increases, your receive power level increases, and your SNR could be increased, which means with the high SNR, you can receive these complex modulation schemes, and then you can also use the data. That is the whole process. Now, it has to receive the demodulated signal under which all conditions. Which all conditions means for the possible input range, which means minus 96 to as high as say minus 20 dBm, and in the presence of in-band blockers, as you see here, with the presence of out-of-band blockers, as you see here. And there is one more thing in the presence of its own transmitted signal. What is that actually? So it will I'll deal with this transmitted signal at the end of the talk. And main important thing is that you have to receive everything without getting saturated, without the receiver getting out of saturation. So how we do that, right? And important factors that we have to keep in mind would be the noise figure, IAP3, IAP2 phase noise. I'll be describing these in the coming slides. Yeah. The next one would be, say again, no, important thing is that we have to receive minus 96 dBm. Typically, a standard will say, according to say if you are using 3G, if you are using 4G, if you are using 5G, what is the minimum sensitivity, minimum power that you have to support? That is called the sensitivity. It is from the standard. Now, the competition in the market would be will be designing a receiver such that you can support more than minus 96 dBm. Like say if there would be receivers out there from Qualcomm which can support minus 100 dBm, right? So this is the way the devices in the market are competing. And at the same time, you can think that you have to this as a receiver is seeing the complete power level, the total range of power that you have received would be minus 96 dBm to 20 dBm at once, which means that's like a dynamic range of 160 dB. Dynamic range means the maximum to minimum what you have to receive. So that would be 116 dB, and you probably have come across some ideas like saying RF ADCs and everything, where you just need a single ADC and then you can convert the RF into the information or in the baseband. So the problem with such ADC or the main challenge for such ADC is to get this such high dynamic range. There are no ADCs right now, or there is almost there. For example, there are Xilinx ADCs which does that. So almost there we have, which can actually support this 116 dB. And another thing is that the sampling frequency of the such ADCs would be quite high. So either you have to reduce the dynamic range or you have to reduce the sampling frequency. These constraints are always happening. Okay, and if you calculate, for example, the SFDR, which is the spurious few dynamic range, which actually allows you to calculate the number of bits for a required for an ADC for a required dynamic range, you can calculate the n, which is the number of bits, and it comes to 18.9 bits. That's actually pretty high. No ADC can support that 18.9 hits at that high sampling frequency. That is really important. Now, typically, what we do is that we use a state-of-the-art ADC, but actually with an automatic gain control, which means that we although we know that we have 20 and minus 96 dBm there, we will be attenuating some of these high frequencies to reduce the dynamic range so that we can use a normal ADC. And as the power increases, we will use an automatic gain control so that we can always map the power into the ADC's range. That's how it is done. Okay. Now, what are the impairments to such dynamic range, right? So as I said, there are two, basically you can classify the impairments into two. One would be in the lower end and one would be in the higher end. Lower end means the impairments which actually results this noise floor to increase. So signal to noise ratio means signal to noise ratio. So if the noise increases, your signal to noise ratio decreases. If the signal decreases, your signal to noise ratio decreases. So these are the two impairments. Now, in the lower level, we got like various sources of the noise. So all the electronic items, whether it is a passive device, active device, transistors, resistors, whatever, right? That actually generates noise. So, and the noise could be classified into several types depending on the sources, depending on their contribution. So there will be thermal. So for example, if you take a plain resistor, it contributes to thermal noise. If you take a active device such as a transistor, NMOS, PMOS transistor, you have a combination of 1 by F noise, thermal noise. You can size the transistor, you can design the transistor such that the noise contribution in thermal or the 1 by F noise is less. So it depends always on the application, what is important. Yeah. And another significant is the phase noise. So all these noises will actually contribute the noise of that receiver, and it will actually increase the noise floor. How? I will show in the next slide how it increases. So the noise floor increases, which means you will be becoming closer and closer to this minus 96 dBm. But if you want to if you want to design a receiver which actually can receive, we actually have to work in 3G, you have to support minus 96 dBm. That is the concern. But supporting minus 96 dBm is not really a big task. Because as I said, the state-of-the-art transceivers, they are supporting even minus 100 dBm using their better design architectures, right? And what about on the higher end? What are the signals what are the reasons, what are the factors which are impairing the signal strength itself? Those are the interferences, which are the in-band interferences, out-of-band interferences also. But these interferences also could increase, for example, the noise floor, because it creates new signals which fall directly on the signal. So these are the two things which we have to take care always while designing a receiver or an architecture. Okay. Now, first thing is how the noise actually impacts or the dynamic range, or how the noise actually reduces the signal to noise ratio, or how the receiver noise could increase the noise flow, right? As I said, you can quantify the noise as a noise figure. Okay, there is a calculation here. It is a very famous Friis equation. So those who are actually working in the RX will immediately figure out what the Friis equation is. It basically says that, so if you have several devices cascaded as you see in the right side, the effective noise you can calculate by an equation. Okay, and the beauty of this equation is that it says that the contribution of the succeeding stages, like for example G2, G3, that can be suppressed if you're having a high gain at the front. So if you have an LNA or low noise amplifier, that is really the importance of a low noise amplifier there. If you have a low noise amplifier with having a gain G and the noise as F, the contribution or the total noise figure of the receiver is something like this. It's proportional to F, and the succeeding contributions will be weighted by the gain of the LNA here, like G1. G1 is present everywhere. So if you keep G1 considerably high, like 15 dB, 20 dB, you can really suppress the noise coming at the later stage. And then the noise of the receiver will only depend on the first device, which is LNA, and hence the name LNA, because it has to provide the low noise, because it directly affects the noise of the receiver here directly. Yeah, you can see from the equation. Mm. And good thing is that you can figure out this F1, G1, everything from simulation. You put it in the equation and you can immediately calculate what could be the noise figure of your receiver from early stage. So then you can allow it to change the design rather than waiting for the complete simulation of your RX. That's the beauty of this one. Now, how does this noise from the receiver impact the noise floor? So as I said, we start from the basic noise floor of the antenna. Or this is even, say, for example, that would be something like, without considering the bandwidth, that is considering like minus 173 dBm per hertz. So if you look on the left side, we have another figure called 107. That is because you have taken a bandwidth into consideration here. But here I am not taking any bandwidth here, because that just to make it application independent. So you have minus 173 dBm per hertz, because it's per hertz. If you add the bandwidth, your hertz will go, and then minus 173 will increase. So here, as you see it here, you have a bandwidth. So you start from the thermal noise floor, which is the ultimate limit or the minimum limit which can be seen by any device. So it's minus 173. And then you have the bandwidth of the standard. So if it is Bluetooth, you have something like 300 kilohertz. If it is 3G, you have something like 5 megahertz. If it is 4G and 5G, you have several bandwidths coming in. So everything is described in the specifications. Have a look, you will understand. So you add the bandwidth, then you reach the ultimate noise floor, which is present by the antenna. Okay, and to that noise floor, you are adding the noise of this receiver itself, which is actually denoted by noise figure. So you calculate this noise here, convert into decibels, and add to this noise figure of indicated by the blue, and then you reach here. So when the receiver is operating, this is a noise floor what the receiver is providing, right? And in order to decode a signal, you have a sufficient you have to have SNR. So if you have working in like very far away from the receiver, from the base station, that is a critical aspect. There you have an SNR of 7 dB, then you can calculate what would be the minimum power supported by the minimum input power to the receiver. That is how you calculate the reference sensitivity. Now, if you want to improve the reference sensitivity, you have to improve the noise figure. You have to reduce the noise figure. You have to reduce the noise from the whole receiver. You can do by, for example, having a super duper LNA, having like almost 1 dB noise figure or less, then your NF will be really 1 dB. But the problem is that getting an LNA for 1 dB actually takes a lot of power, and we need to consume power as well, or not consume, so conserve power as well in the mobile phones, because it directly applies your usage. So that is how the noise figure impacts the sensitivity, right, at the lower end. Now at the higher end, what happens? So this is a typical curve which probably most of you have seen. So this basically says that you increase the input power, the output power also increases because it is supported by gain. So I just put 0 here, but typically it starts from a value which could be the gain. No, sorry, yeah, it could be started with the gain, the output power here, not from 0. So for certain range, your input and output power has got a linear range. So it increases linearly like this, right? But after some time, you can see that the power doesn't increases, but it actually slowly saturates. And the first idea which comes to everyone's mind is that okay, it is maximum limited by your supply voltage, right? So every chip has got a supply voltage. So if it is 1.8 volt, 1.2 volt, definitely as you get closer to the input power or the output power get close to 1.2 volt or the supply volt, it will saturate. But in reality, it saturates much more before the supply voltage, because there will be so many drops in supply voltage, it won't be getting that headroom. That's first thing. Second thing is that the power will be so high that the nonlinearity of the device itself will lead to the compression of the power. That is the thing. So here it's a linear region, because for example, going from, say, let's say, a typical assumption would be, say, going from minus 96 dBm to as high as, say, minus 40 dBm, it might go linear, and then it will start to saturate. Then you have to use an automatic gain control and to further increase the gain, further increase the linearity here. And the point when this effective power is 1 dB less than the ideal power, that will be called as 1 dB compression power. And this is important because it is used as a reference between devices. So if you want to have a device which actually can tolerate with where the requirement is having high input power, you have to see the P1 dB or O1 dB, like output 1 dB or input 1 dB. And whichever is higher will actually receive more input power, because it is related, like the usual power is 3 dB less than the P1 dB, because here everywhere it is non-linear. So if you take 3 dB less than this power somewhere here, you have the maximum input power receivable. So that is important. This is the highest point that you can receive. Yeah. And this is due to non-linearity, nothing else. This is simply because there is, if you increase the power, certain non-linear things comes into effect, and it actually reduces the fundamental power within the receiver. That's how it is. How it is happening? So if don't look at the equations if you get confused. It's basic trigonometry equations. This is not complex. No, this thing, how you can figure it out is that you have to assume that in a receiver you have two sources, such that, say, V1 and V2 at frequencies like omega 1 and omega 2, and you can represent the equation, the input as, for example, as two cosines, with having the amplitude as V1 and V2, and having the frequencies omega 1 and omega 2. Okay. So even if it is not so let's say the x of t is like it's a complex waveform. X of t is an input waveform. It's a band of frequency, whatever it is, right? So any device, whether it's a transistor, whether it's a LNA, it's a block, you can represent it like in a generic way like this. The output will be a function of, for example, there will be an anode, which will be the DC value. So you give an input, there definitely there will be some DC changes at the output, right? So that is this anode. And then there will be gain to this x, because there is a gain, for example, here that's a linear region that is denoted by this a1. Okay. So ideally we just need a0 and a1, because that would be the case when you are operating at these cases. Okay. But as the signal gets power higher, you have some more factors coming in, which would be a2 x2 square and a3 x3 square, right? And typically a1 and there is something wrong here. So a2 and a3, in fact, not a1 and a2, they are actually the second order and the third order coefficients here. And as the power is increasing, the a2 and a3 will become significant, because their value is very low. So initially when the power is low, this contribution of a2 and a3 won't be there, or which means there won't be any nonlinearity, which means you will get really a linear curve. But as the power is increasing, you have this a2 and a3 significant. And if you expand this equation, you can see that it will generate some frequencies which is of the same frequency as omega 1 and omega 2. So if you increase this one, there will be some frequency components generated, which actually falls on the top of V1 and V2, and actually it suppresses V1 and V2 because it's adding negative. So as a result, if you increase the power, you have a reduction in the output power. That is the basic raw cause of nonlinearity. Okay. Now, if you have a very single power, so this is also the concept before jamming, for example. Like if you have a normal device working, you put in a radio source which is in band and which is very high, and the power is so high that due to the nonlinearity present in the inherent radio receiver, it will try to saturate, and it will no longer can receive the signal it used to receive because it is saturated. So that is actually a jammed receiver. That is a concept of jamming. Not to use it, but just saying. Now, how can we figure out what are the contributions? We just expand this one. So here I have just taken an example of x of t as a combination. Substitute here, expand the trigonometry equation. So you can know cos of a plus b the whole square and cos of a plus b the whole cube. You can just expand it. And I'm just skipping the calculation part. The thing is, if effectively you have a lot of big equation coming in, right? And then you have several components here. So earlier we had only, say, W1 and W2, or omega 1 and omega 2 as input signal. But now the output has got several frequencies, like you have a DC, you have a gain, like omega 1 and omega 2, of course, expected. Then you have, for example, twice omega 1 and twice omega 1 and omega 2, it should be. No, okay, no, for example, sorry. So you have, again, from the square term, you have a frequency of omega 1 coming in. You have twice the frequency coming in. You have the sum and difference of frequencies. You have the twice the second frequency. You have the same frequency. So you this same frequency, it will actually directly fall onto the fundamental frequency again. So that affects actually the signal directly. Okay, and plus there are other frequencies also. So the effect of nonlinearity is threefold. One is that it affects the DC gain, because you can see that they have some DC components also generated in this equation. So if the nonlinearity is so high, due to the second nonlinearity, you have a problem with the DC. You have a third nonlinearity, you have the addition and subtraction of the frequencies and the combinations of that. So these are the impacts of nonlinearity. It has to be really taken into account while you're designing the thing. And similarly, if you have two multiple interferences coming, as I have shown in the first cases, right? You have the in-band, out-of-band interferences and all. And let's take this condition such that, let's say, omega 1 and omega 2 are two such interferences. And if you pass these two into this nonlinear receiver, the same effect happens as I shown here. Okay, it will generate sum and differences of the input frequencies. It will already generate twice of these frequencies. It will always generate this twice omega 1 plus omega 2, omega 1 minus omega, all combinations you have. And think about that, if such a combination actually falls onto your received signal, what happens? You reduce the signal power, you reduce the signal to noise ratio. So this is the impact of the nonlinearity. So when P1 and P2 are there, when such interferences are there, and when they are of high power, they will generate some nonlinear components which could fall in another frequencies. Like, easy way to see is that you have a combination of omega 1 plus or minus omega 2, and 2 omega 1 plus or minus omega 2, and 2 omega 2 plus or minus omega 1. These are the combinations. And then these frequencies, when it fall to the receive band, it will actually reduce the signal power, and then you will have reduction in signal to noise ratio. Now, these second and third nonlinearity, which is actually quantified by IAP2 and IAP3, it is clearly defined by the equation, and you can even figure it out. Say, for example, for a given IAP3, what is the highest amount of interferences which is tolerable. Now, once you have this information, you can actually directly go and design a filter which can say filter the interferences to the level which is acceptable by your IAP3. So if you have a weak IAP3 and IAP2, IP3 and IP2 means actually first, second order and third order intercept point. It's a way of quantifying the nonlinearity. If that values are very low, you need a heavy filtering, and if those values are high, you can relax in filtering. Now, the state of the art research is happening in this direction, such that you try to improve the IP2 and IP3 using system techniques, so that you can relax the filtering. You can save money because the filters are external components. This is the way we are going. Now, another important point is the phase noise from the synthesizer. So what is synthesizer, why it is important, and so on. These are the some things. For example, this is a typical receiver as I have on the left side. So you have a antenna where you receive a spectrum. Then you have a low noise amplifier, which I described before. Then you have a mixer, and the mixer will actually mixer is actually a nonlinear component again. What function is that, so the received signal is of very high frequency. Like, say, if you're using a 5G system, the frequency can be as high as, I think, 30 something gigahertz, and as low as something like 900 megahertz. Now, all these frequencies has to be down converted to a baseband frequency, which can be fitting into the Nyquist region of this ADC. That is how that is what receiver is doing. Now, in order to down convert, we need to also generate a signal internally. For example, if you have a signal which is, say, let's assume that this is 3 gigahertz, and if the VCO is providing, say, 2 gigahertz, the mixer output will be the sum and difference of the frequencies. Sum and difference means here you will get 1 gigahertz, which is 2 minus 3 minus 2, and then you will have 5 gigahertz, which is 3 plus 2, right? And how clean the signal is, how clean the signal which is provided by the VCO is, that will decide the noise performance also of the receiver. How is that? Now, typically, what we like to have is a like a spectrum like this. So just look on the right side. This is a spectrum from a synthesizer, or like a VCO, which is from analog devices. And if you look on the x and y axis, this is how normally you represent a spectrum. So on the y axis, you have the frequency offsets, which means the central point will be referring to the power produced by the fundamental. So you can see a big peak there. In the right side, you will have still some power, which is actually by the noise of the system. And this spectrum actually shows, for example, say at 1 kilohertz away from the center, you have a power of minus 90 dBm. Say, for example, 500.5 kilohertz, you have a power of, say, for example, minus 85 dBm and so on. And these are really important because this power will actually decide whether you can comfortably demodulate your spectrum, demodulate your requirements or not. And the more, so for example, with the generation advancement, like from 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, the requirements on PLL has been really strict because of the different more complex modulation waveform. Okay, and the noise performance of this PLL is very important. How we can quantify that one? Now, okay, yeah, here, yeah. Looking into this noise spectrum in detail, for example, on the right side, you can see the same noise spectrum. If you zoom this point, which is under this red circle, you can have like we can have like a curve like that. So 0 is again the portion where you have the fundamental, and then on the right side you have an offset frequency, and this offset frequencies is dominated by several noise sources. For example, there is a flicker noise floor actually there, which is actually denoted by F1, and then you have a flat noise, which is actually denoted by thermal noise, and so on. Yeah, and each of these noises will be contributed by certain components in your PLL. For example, if you have a current mirror, it actually generates, for example, the flicker noise and also the thermal noise as well. If you have resistance, it will contribute to the thermal noise. The channel resistance of your NMOS will contribute to thermal noise and so on. So if you want to reduce the noise, you have to assume what are the contributions from these components, and we have to design so that you reduce the components, right? That is one thing. Okay. Now, what is the impact of such a phase noise on a receiver? So for example, this is the same spectrum, but we have to see that each of this point, right, in this noise, we can assume that it's like an interference like this. Okay. Now, let's assume that we are receiving signal like this. There is a spectrum which we want to receive, and then there are some interferences which is like it could be in band or out of band. And coincidentally, there is an interference which is of the same offset from the spectrum as shown here. All right. What happens is that if you take it through a mixer, the interference, the interference as well as the phase noise per, as well as the interference also mix down and create another interference directly on the received signal. As a result, the signal to noise ratio will dampen. So that's a problem. So what you have to do is that you have to reduce this power of the phase noise as much as possible, or you have to reduce this interferences received as much as possible. So this depends on your filtering mechanisms, right? And this depends on your synthesizers. So combination of these two will actually give you a better signal to noise ratio of the system. So it is really important that you consider all these impacts very early in your design stage so that you don't be surprised when you have the complete top level simulation. Now, an interesting another fact would be the TX leakage as an interference. So most of the devices, so if you look at the mobile communications, you have several standards and several bands. For example, there are FDD bands which is fully duplex, there is HDD bands which is half duplex, and there is time duplex also, right? Now, what are the differences between these things is that for a full duplex, you have the transmitter and the receiver working simultaneously, and they are working in slightly different frequencies. Okay, and one research which is happening is to make them work in same frequency so that we can save some of the spectrum, and spectrum is very expensive. You can see, it's actually sold in billions. So there are work happening like that. And even if the main problem of this full duplex is the interference from its own transmitter, right? So hence obviously there are some advantages for if you go to HDD like half duplex, where your receiver and transmitter are not on all the time. I mean to say at least at the same time. And at the same time, also you have this time duplex where receiver and transmitter could be of same frequency but at different time slots. So there is no interferences as well. Okay. Now this TX leakage is a severe case of full duplex communication, which is actually shown in the right side. This is just a front end. So here the top part will be a receiver and the bottom part would be a power amplifier. And the top part, the first component is obviously the LNA, right? Now typically these in an FDD are separated by a circulator or a duplexer. Okay. And how the circulator works and how duplexer works, most of you know. The thing is, a circulator has got a direction dependency, which means all the frequency which is being received, which is coming in this direction, it will be passed to the upper portion. All the frequencies which are, all the power which are incoming from the lower will be passed to the right side to the antenna. So all the transmitted power has to ideally go to the antenna. All the received power has to go to here. So because it is direction dependent, you can actually separate the frequency. If you have separate frequencies, you can separate the reception and transmission at the same time. At the same time, there is also a component which is called a duplexer, which you can put it here because that is basically means there are like two filters. So one filters will, so the receive part will filter the transmit part, and the transmit part will filter the receive part, and vice versa. So that is how it is, right? So however you make the circulator, however state of the art circulator it is, however state of the art duplexer it is, there will be a finite isolation between the transmitter and receiver. That is one cause of concern. So which means here, so typically assume that you have 40 dB. 40 dB itself is a pretty good value, right? So if you can also probably get something which is 60 dB or 50 dB, but then it would be very expensive as well. 40 dB itself would be expensive for sure. Now assume that you have a transmission which is as high as 22 dBm. So this is a typical maximum power from the standard. And in fact, for the 5G, this comes around like 70 dBm or something. It's very high. Yeah. And if you have an isolation, you can imagine how much would be the TX leakage here, right? So that is one sort of TX leakage. So it actually leaks through here. And another important thing is that, as I said, that circulation is circulator, for example, is direction dependent. And what can come back other than the receive signal, which would be the reflector transmit signal. So there will be an output impedance of the circulator, there will be an input impedance of the antenna, and if there is a mismatch, you will have a reflection coming in. Assume that here your reflection coefficient is something like minus 35 dB, okay? And assume that you have 22 dBm power here. You assume that 2 dB will be dropped in the circulator. Then the reflected power is something like 20 plus this reflection coefficient, whatever it is denoted here. Okay, that comes to something like minus 15 dBm. So imagine you are transmitting 22 dBm and you have a reflected wave which is as high as minus 15. That is higher than your out of band interference. That is, so the TX leakage itself will present a big headache for the receiver design. So when say the architecture was not as mature as now, but what they used to do is that you try to separate the TX and RX power to high, like a big there's a big gap of frequency between, so that even if you take a normal filter, the roll off is such that at higher end you have sufficient attenuation, and you can actually, if you put a filter at this point, you can attenuate the TX. But that is not always the case because the spectrum is getting occupied as rapidly as it is, and the frequencies are coming closer. So if you have it, there are some conditions where you are in FDD where your duplex distance, which is the distance between the TX and RX, that is as low as say 20 megahertz or less. In that case, your TX leakage will be very high, and hence what they have to do is that they reduce the power because otherwise your receiver is going to be overwhelmed. Yeah. So that is there. So here there are many conditions to take care. So you have to do something in the system design. Basically, you have to have a TX filter here, which is susceptible for the which is isolating the TX reflection. You have to have a very good antenna impedance matching. So minus 35 itself is pretty high. But the problem is here, for example, when you move around your phone in that case, and you put on your table or put you close to ear, the impedance of the antenna is different. And as a result, this reflection coefficient is different. As a result, the reflection from the antenna is different. As a result, your TX leakage is also different. So you have to do a certain set of simulations to make sure what is your worst case and what is your worst case TX leakage you can tolerate. So this is how you actually design for such cases. Okay. And again, such a TX interferences along with another blocker of the same power could actually be a very strong interferences because it can mix together, it can generate so frequencies, and it can directly fall on, for example, onto the top of your wanted signal, right? So that is some case here. So for example, you have a wanted signal which is 2.1. This is, I think, band 40 of your 5G signal or 4G signal. And then you have a TX leakage which is at the duplex distance like this. And for example, you have another leakage coming, another interference coming, which is twice this frequency. And the result is that these two frequencies will add. So for example, you can compute twice this frequency minus this one frequency. This there is something wrong in this x-axis. Sorry. So if you calculate these two, it will result in an interference or an IM3 product which directly will fall onto the receive frequency. Then you reduce the, say for example, if you have this power and if you take an assumption of IAP3, for example, then you have an input power which is as low as minus 73, which is very close to the 100 signal. So in this case, you're actually saturating the receiver. So you have to really make sure that the input power or the TX leakage is reduced such that your sensitivity is preserved and you have the sufficient signal to noise ratio. So all these things you can calculate, for example, as early as in your design stage using a simple math, and so that you have an advantage. You don't get surprised when you go, for example, to the later stages. Yeah. So summary is that uh, there are a lot of RF imperfections. Basically, you can classify them as belonging to the lower end and the upper end of the dynamic range. And the lower end, you have the noise. So you have to figure out how much is the noise figure of the system, how much it is required, so to preserve your sensitivity. So you can simply do a math using a Frick's equation, then you can calculate that, right? Another thing is also the phase noise. So phase noise has to be really has to go in hand with the filter discussions. It also depends on a lot on the moderation schemes as well. Now, another problem is of the linearity. So all the systems are non-linear, and when the power is sufficiently high, either due to the received signal or due to the interferences, the non-linearity will kick in, right? And this non-linearity will actually impair the desired signal because it would result to mixing of frequencies. And if any of these mixing frequencies fall onto a desired signal, you lose your signal, right? So we have to reduce in-band interferences by use of filtering out of interference of TF leakage, or we have to have a device which has to have high linearity. So you have to have a better noise figure to take care of your sensitivity. You have to have a high linearity like IEP3 or IEP2. If you want a high IEP2, you go for a differential design. If you don't want IEP3, you really have to design for this one. You have to have greater headroom. You can calculate the PMDV of the circuit in simulation to figure out what would be the maximum power that you can receive. And if you cannot design for this IEP3, IEP2 because of your high power consumption, what you can do is that you have to put filtering. Then it will increase the cost. But some applications, for example, where you have large form factor, maybe that's completely okay, right? And these sources could be early identified in system design, and it can help relax the circuit design and can be easily represented basic math. That is the beauty of it. So you can just start with a normal spreadsheet, put these values of noise figure IP3, calculate the whole everything, then you know where you stand with respect to an architecture. And then you can compare several architectures to see whether your system specification has been met or not. So that is the whole process. So that's actually from my side. Hope you liked it. I hope I didn't confuse you a lot with these equations and all. And I know that many students are attending here, so it's an important information to the students, researchers, PhD students, or the possible interns, that we are working in various fields at Elysium Circuits in Kochi, as well as at Jülich Forschung Zentrum in Germany, in various fields such as circuit design, system design, DSP, baseband design, and verification. So if you are interested in, say, joining us, you want to as in these positions like student, part-time, research, PhD, and whatever, shoot a mail to us either to my chief, like Fan Vasan here, or to myself here, or to my company here as Elysium Circuits. Yeah. So we are really looking for good students, and we are looking for a lot of cooperation with India. We have already started a lot of work together, and industry students are always welcome. Please don't just look our website if you are not sure about the email ID, and just go to ZA2. You'll get further information about their activities. Okay. So saying that, I'll close my presentation. Thanks a lot for the invitation, and yeah, look forward for some questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Arun. So now
Thank you.
forum is open for questions. Participants are requested to please write their question in Q&A section. So Dr. Arun, you can find it in Q&A section. It is on the
Okay.
right side. Yeah. Can you see it?
Yeah, yes, I think I can see. Okay, that's a question first from Mr. Bose. How can we eliminate a noise which lies in the same frequency point F naught along with the received desirable frequencies? We cannot eliminate noise. That's the first thing. Noise is always present. The only thing is that we can reduce the impact of the noise, right? So as I said that you have a noise floor. So the fundamental noise flow will be limited by the thermal noise from the antenna. So you have a minimum limit, and you have a noise which is in the same band, but your received signal has to have some power. Then it can distinguish the signal from the noise all the time. Okay. Now, if you are going to you are going to make a front end, or if you are going to make a components of the front end's LNA, or let it be like you are going to design an analog circuit or even digital. So uh, you have, first of all, you have to understand there are many sources of these noises, as I said, thermal noise and everything. And for the tools that we are using right now, for example, if you are using a Cadence Virtuoso for analog design, or any Synopsys or Mentor Graphics, any tool, you have the noise simulation there. You can simulate it and figure out, for example, what are the contributions from several of these components. For example, if you have an op-amp design, you have two input devices, you have a PMOS load, you have a common mode feedback, and so on. You calculate the noise, you run the simulation, you do a noise simulation. You can tell the simulation will tell you, for example, what are the noise contributions from each of these components. Okay, and what is the impact of this noise component to the overall noise performance of the circuit. And there are some techniques. For example, if you want to keep the noise less, obviously you can pour more current into that one. And second thing is that if the primary reason is thermal noise, you can increase the size of the transistor and so on. So doing this smart way, or it's very well documented way, you can reduce the noise from this system so that you can limit the noise contribution from your design. So noise is always present. We only can limit it. And if the Z signal is have sufficient power, then you can always demodulate it without any problem. So that is the whole point. Yeah. So I don't think there are many other questions. Maybe I'll wait here.
Participants can write their question in Q&A section if they are having.
Yeah. Trade-off between automatic gain control and input compression point. Avinash sir, hi. So very good point. So as I told before, right? So we have if you compare the input and output curve, you had some point your input compression point is actually saturating, right? So if you don't use any automatic gain control, which means, say for example, let's say we are working in the sensitivity region of minus 96 dBm when the input power is very low. So obviously for our noise performance and for receiving that signal, we will be having a high gain in the system. So that is typically something around 80 to 100 dB in a receiver, and hence you have an input compression point. Yeah, and this input compression point will be as low as say minus 50 or minus 60 dBm. So if you want to receive that higher point, that minus 60, so if you compare the mobile, we have a higher power as minus 20 as a usable power. So if you want to receive minus 20 dBm, we definitely have to cut down the gain. So if you cut down the gain, our 1 dB compression point is effectively increasing according to the gain. For example, if you have 100 dB of gain and then we have a 1 dB compression point of minus 50, and then I cut down the gain to 20, effectively my 1 dB compression point is going to become minus 50 plus 20. Yeah, that is depending that the compression is happened only by the gain. But if you are already in this nonlinear region, which is already in this curve, we cannot do much then. We cannot really improve the 1 dB compression point even if we cut on the gain. It actually depends on the bottleneck in the complete system. I think I hope I answered your question.
Any other question?
IAP3 important. Yeah, one advantage. So any system you take, IAP3 is somewhat important. But the thing in GNSS is that basically in the GNSS we are receiving the noise. We don't receive any signal because you already know that the signal is actually within the noise floor of the system. So IAP3 is not as important as, for example, a GSM band or a 3G band in a GNSS system for sure. And also that is another one of the reason is that the GNSS band exclusively uses this band for navigation, where you don't have much interferences, but still you have some interferences at certain offset points which you need to filter it out. The problem is not because that your IEP3 or your noise is going to be changed, but the problem is that that high power which is receiving apart from your GNSS band could actually saturate your front end. Because if you're working in a satellite, that power is going to be pretty high. It's very high, like around like say minus 20 dBm or plus. So if unless you don't filter it out, this could be a problem. But as such, IEP3 or say IEP2 is not that critical for GNSS system as it is for a GSM band or a say I don't know a communication band or a Wi-Fi band, for example. Nice to see you, Vipul.
So I guess we don't have questions left, right? Do you
Yeah.
have any question, Arun?
No, it's I think all done. It's all done.
Okay. So, Dr. Manish, let's close the session.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Arun, for sparing your valuable time and sharing the journey of RF front end design. Thanks a lot, and we look forward to have a collaboration with your institute here in Kerala. Thanks, Vipul.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for the
Thank you.
invitation. It was really a pleasure. Again,
Yeah,
always
over
nice
to
to
you,
meet you.
Arun, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Arun, for